Last time I preached, I began the series on preparing for persecution, as was suggested. So this is a continuation of that idea. I want you to see that there is what the Bible calls the reproach of Christ. In Psalm 22, Jesus quoted the first verse of this psalm while he was on the cross. But verse 6 says, "But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, He trusted on the Lord that He would deliver him. Let Him deliver him, seeing He delighted in him." I want you to see that Jesus was reproached. The term reproach means to scorn, to taunt, to shame or disgrace. Has anyone ever looked at you for your belief and made fun of you for your belief? Taunted you? Scorned you for your convictions? Then understand that they did that to Jesus. And so if you follow Jesus, they're going to do that to you. This psalm is a reference to not only how David felt, but how Jesus felt. He was despised of the people. Now, why would someone despise someone? For their belief. Now, maybe it's because they believe differently than them. There's a nature in us that wants others to believe exactly as I believe. Yet, when that belief differs from mine, I've got to be careful. Rather than taunting them, scorning them, shaming them, reproaching them for their belief, I need to consider, number one, is this belief founded upon truth? If it's their conviction based upon truth. If it's your conviction based upon truth, you don't want to be treated shamefully. But people will. Because that's what they did to Jesus. Now Psalm 69. Similarly, verse 7 says, "Because for thy sake I have borne reproach. Shame hath covered my face. I am become a stranger unto my brethren, and an alien unto my mother's children. For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. And the reproaches of them that reproach thee are fallen upon me. When I wept, I chastened my soul with fasting. That was to my reproach. I made sackcloth also my garment, and I became a proverb to them. They that sit in the gate speak against me, and I was the song of the drunkards." Very much a description not only of David, but also of Jesus. We're going to be made fun of. We're going to be reproached. Because that's what happened to Jesus. Consider some of the things they said about Jesus. In Matthew 11, even though He came neither eating nor drinking, they say He hath the devil. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, Behold, a man gluttonous and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. So they accused Him of being a drunkard. He was not. They accused Him of being a glutton. That was false. So people might make false accusations about you, because that's what they did with Jesus. In John 9, in verse 16, "Therefore said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day." That was a false accusation. claiming that Jesus broke the Sabbath. That wasn't true. I don't believe he broke the Sabbath. That was their misunderstanding. Matthew 26, verse 59. Says, now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came 2 false witnesses, and said, this fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. Now, did he say that? Yes, he said that. But what were they making him sound like he said? Not the way they were twisting it. He did say, destroy this temple. In 3 days I'll raise it up. But he was speaking about the temple of his body. They made him sound like he was going to destroy the physical temple that Herod had built, which was not true. So Jesus was reproached. That's the first point I want you to see. But secondly, I want you to see that if Jesus was reproached and you follow Jesus, you're going to be reproached. In Acts chapter 6, verse 13, concerning Stephen, there were some who set up false witnesses, which said, this man ceaseth not to speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth shall destroy this place and shall change the customs which Moses delivered us. Now again, did Jesus say that? And did Stephen say that Jesus said that? Probably, but the way they framed it was so antagonistic. They're demonizing Stephen by the way that he said it, or making it sound like the way he said it was so wrong and contrary. Stephen, no doubt, was teaching that we're under a new law and that the temple is no longer physical. But to people who've always worshiped that way, now hearing that, who are tied to that system of worshiping that way all the time, and that's all they knew, people don't like change. They don't like when someone is doing something different than them, and so therefore now they're persecuting Stephen. They're claiming he's saying something. He's trashing Moses. He's changing the law. He's disregarding the temple, which was a mischaracterization. That's as old as the Bible. You even go back to Cain and Abel. That's how old persecution is. Abel worshiped God. He practiced his faith. His brother was not regarded by God. So his brother was jealous of him when he could have been accepted too. All he had to do was worship, practice his faith, just like his brother, and he could have been accepted too. But instead, he attacked his brother and killed his brother because of that. That's going to happen. And so here is, under the cause of Christ, Stephen is the first one. But he's not the first one to ever be persecuted for his faith. Tertullus said this about Paul in Acts 24. Paul is under trial, and his accuser, Tertullus, this slick-lipped fella, he makes this oration about Paul and says, in Acts 24:5, we have found this man a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us with great violence, took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. You hear what he's saying. He said, this guy, he's a big troublemaker. And he's the ringleader of these other troublemakers. That's all they're doing is causing trouble. What he really means is if Paul would get in line with him, as long as he was in agreement with him, okay, then I guess the troublemaking would be done. But since Paul is teaching something different, he's calling him a troublemaker. You know, there's a sense in which, yes, we wish people would be fair-minded, hear both points of view, reason together, talk together, listen to one another. But sometimes that doesn't always take place. So Christ's followers, here's just two examples, Stephen and Paul. There's many other examples that, Lord willing, we shall show in a future lesson. But since that's the case, I want you to see that you should expect persecution. The sooner you get this in your head, the better off you're going to be. You could say why all day long. Why does this happen to me? Why is this happening to me? That's a waste of time. Because it's going to happen. There will always be people who will make fun of you for your belief. It's always going to be that way. It comes with the territory. And so John 15, mentioned last time, but I want to bring it to your attention again, that Jesus said, John 15:18, if the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own. But because ye are not of the world, but I've chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you. The servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they've kept my saying, they will keep yours also. But all these things will they do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent me. If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin. But now they have no cloak for their sin. He that hateth me, hateth my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which none other man did, they had not had sin. But now have they both seen and hated both me and my Father. But this cometh to pass, that the word might be fulfilled that is written in their law. They hated me without a cause. Now we can look and see there's some situations where you can say, okay, here's why that person was hated. But on this one, Jesus is saying they're hating me without a cause. There's no justifiable reason. There's no sense behind why they hated Jesus. What did he do to harm them? How was he hurting them? What did he say about them that was wrong? What did he do that was wrong? How was anything that Jesus did anything but for their good? And yet they hated him. So 1 John 3:13 says, marvel not, my brethren, if the world hate you. We'd be better off if we could just memorize that verse. It's not that long of a verse. I'd encourage you, do that today. Marvel not, my brethren, if the world hate you. 1 John 3:13. Don't be surprised. Don't be caught off guard. Expect it. It's going to happen. Luke 6:26. Jesus said, woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. Now here's where you should be surprised. Here's where you should stop and think and wonder what's wrong. Is if you never have anybody to say anything, and everybody likes you, that might cause you to stop and wonder, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I the salt of the earth? Am I the light of the world? Am I reflecting my Lord? If nobody has a problem with me. Now, it's not that we intentionally are trying to make people feel this way about us. It's just going to happen. You can try every way that you can to have your speech seasoned with salt. You can strive to do good. You can strive to have a good example. You don't even have to be proclaiming your belief loudly. You don't have to be obnoxious about it. You don't have to be a jerk about it. You just simply be what you ought to be, believe what you ought to believe, do what you ought to do, and there are going to be people who are going to hate you for that. And they're going to talk behind your back about that. And it's part of the territory. It's going to happen. Something's wrong if it doesn't happen. Might need to self-reflect and say, am I what I ought to be, if that's not happening to you? And when it does, though, here's how you should respond, is consider it an honor. Don't moan about it. Don't whine about it. Don't complain. Be happy. You have nothing to hang your head about. If you're doing what the Lord said to do, you don't have to have any regrets about that. You don't have to feel bad. You don't have to have any guilt. You don't have to beat yourself up. You can have your head squarely on your shoulders. And you can look someone in the eye. Not as sarcastic or smart aleck or anything like that. But you can simply know who you are. You can know what you're doing and what you're believing, who you're standing for, who you're following. And it's not about you anyway. But you're honoring the Lord because you're following in His footsteps. Matthew 5 and verse 11. Jesus said, "Blessed are ye." Do you consider that? Blessed are ye. Not poor little old you because you're being persecuted. Not, oh, I feel sorry for you because you're persecuted. That's not how you should see it when you're persecuted. You should see it as a blessing and an honor. When men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely, for my sake. When it's for the Lord's sake, what a blessing. Jesus said it this way in Luke 6 and verse 22. Blessed are ye. Do you consider it a blessing? When men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company. That's a form of persecution. Not all persecution is murder. I mean, that murder is definitely persecution. But there's other forms. When people don't hang around you because they don't have anything to do with you, or they push you away, drive you away, they separate you from their company, that's a form of persecution. He's saying, blessed are ye, and shall reproach you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Listen to what He says to you to do. Rejoice ye in that day, and leap for joy. Now that's not our natural reaction, right? Somebody calls you a name, insults you, says something behind your back, hurts you in some way. It's not our natural reaction to want to leap for joy. But Jesus is saying to do this. But if you understood why, what I'm sensing here in Jesus' tone is He knows what's in store for us in heaven. He knows the reward. And He can't wait for you to receive it. And if you knew that reward that was waiting on you in heaven, you'd be so happy. You'd be so joyous because of what's happening. And you would let the pull of that reward be what's on your mind rather than the pain or your feelings being hurt. And so that's what Jesus is saying. Now, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 14. Peter said it this way. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye. When's the last time you were happy? When you were picked on for your belief. For the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. Then in verse 16, yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. You got no reason to be embarrassed of your belief in the Lord. Now, he does say in this context, let me clarify. He says, don't let any man among you suffer as an evildoer, murder, thief, so forth. Now, it kind of reminds me of a man who was speeding, and the cop pulls him over for speeding. And the guy's complaining to the cop, you're persecuting me. And then he's complaining later, I got that ticket for the cause of Christ. No, you didn't. You were speeding. You were breaking the law. And so the cop pulled you over for that. This is not something that Peter is saying, okay, let him not be. You should be ashamed for breaking the law. But if you're obeying the law, and you're obeying God's law, you don't have anything to be ashamed of. Now if you're being picked on, that's the one that's considered an honor. So, another thing, someone recently pointed out that, not here, that there was someone who had said that brethren were trying to encourage them to come and worship. I guess that's a problem that's occurred recently through the pandemic, that there are challenges there, that some have wanted to be home. And it's become easier to stay home than to come to worship. But someone was encouraging them to come and worship, and they were saying that they were being persecuted because brethren were encouraging them to come worship. No, that's not persecution. That's brethren trying to encourage them to worship. You're not being persecuted if someone's encouraging you to do the right thing. Okay. But now, if you're following your convictions of what's right, and someone's picking on you for that, now that's a form of persecution. But look at what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 10. Again, consider an honor when you're doing the right thing and you're being persecuted for that. Not when you're doing the wrong thing. But he says in 2 Corinthians 12:10, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. Now here's the challenge. Paul wanted this thorn in the flesh removed in this context. We don't know what the thorn in the flesh was. People debate that. I don't think anybody knows specifically what that was. But it was something or someone that was a pain in the side. And Paul wanted it removed, and he prayed that it would be removed. And yet it wasn't. And the Lord's answer was, my grace is sufficient for you. Sometimes that's the answer from God. Doesn't mean He doesn't care. Doesn't mean He doesn't notice. He'll take care of us. But He doesn't promise that He takes away all of our discomfort. He does promise that He'll be with us. But what is happening here is He's encouraging Paul to use this as a time to rely on God. Let the Lord's strength be what carries you through. Sometimes it's those difficulties and weaknesses that cause us to draw closer to the Lord and pray harder, to dig deeper within ourselves, and to realize that we are in need of someone that is more powerful than us. But when you do, can you do as Paul and accept the answer that is given? And do as he said, take pleasure. What an attitude. Here it was, he wanted this removed. It was hurting him. And yet he says, okay then. Most gladly, therefore. Now look at that attitude. Do we do that? We want the pain to end, but it's not ending So accept it with a good attitude. I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches. How do you take pleasure? It's not that Paul is some kind of, he's not sadistic here. He's not, has this some kind of weird thing that he loves pain. That's not what he's saying. But he takes pleasure in the challenge and in the opportunity to, this is the time where he can be what God is wanting him to be, relying on him. And so therefore, when you are reproached for Christ, take it patiently. Take it patiently. You've got to have a strength of endurance. The Lord talked about those who in time of temptation will fall away, or persecution. Some people will follow the Lord as long as it's comfortable. Then when it gets hard, okay, now they've left him. Demas loved the world and forsook Paul. Some people will do what they're supposed to do till it's difficult. Now the real challenge comes, and now, that faithfulness has ended. You got to learn how to last. You got to be rooted and grounded in the truth. In Galatians 6, verse 7, he says, "Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting." And I love this part. He says, "Let us not be weary in well-doing. For in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." When you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it could be tempting to let that wear you out. It could become tiresome and tedious to do the right thing and not always see the result just yet. So he says, "Be not weary in well-doing." And it's just like an agricultural example. A farmer plants, and the crop don't come up in a day, but he waits. He tends to his field. He does what he can. And he keeps doing it. And he keeps doing it. And he keeps waiting. And he keeps waiting until it comes up. And how does he know it's going to come up? There's a thing that I think that happens to people is time passes. I want this thing to end. I want it to get better. And I'm not seeing light at the end of the tunnel just yet. Or it's not as fast as I want it to be. And we become discouraged. And so this passage is telling us, don't give up. Be not weary in well-doing. You're going to reap if you don't faint, if you don't give up, don't lose heart. Keep on keeping on. Keep your eyes fixed where it needs to go. Now Hebrews 10, in verse 32, he reminds the Hebrews, "Call to remembrance the former days in which after you were illuminated, you endured a great fight of afflictions." Look at all the things they endured whenever they became a Christian. They became a gazing stock. What's that? People looking at them funny. Both by reproaches, they were insulting them, made fun of them, and afflictions. They made their life difficult. Sometimes it's by social pressure. Sometimes it's by intimidation. Sometimes it's by threatenings. Sometimes it's by the job, like a loss of income. We won't trade with you. We won't do business with you. Or you won't have your job. Various things like that. But look at all the things they gave up. Verse 34. "For you had compassion of me and my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods." You know what that makes me think? They lost some material possessions when they became a Christian. But how did they take it? Patiently. joyfully even. Knowing in yourselves that you have in heaven a better and an enduring substance. If something of yours gets damaged by persecution, what you should do is say, I'm getting a better one in heaven. Nobody's going to damage my possessions in heaven. Right? Take it joyfully. Verse 35, cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. For ye have need of patience. That patience is talking about endurance. You got to be able to last. And again he says in verse 37, for yet a little while. Whatever's happening here is only temporary. But what we have there is forever. And so that's what matters. That's the most important thing. And so not only take it patiently, how else should you react? Well, understand, it could be worse. Look at Hebrews 12, verse 3. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself. Who's that? Jesus. Consider, how did he handle it when he was made fun of and attacked and ridiculed? He says, consider him, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. But then he says, ye have not yet resisted unto blood. What's that mean? He's saying you're not bleeding yet. It's another way of saying you ain't dead yet. You're still alive. It hasn't killed you yet. And if that's the case, realize other people have had it worse. And yes, they have. And we may give some examples in future lessons, Lord willing. But what we need to do in the meantime is we need to trust God. Trust God. 1 Peter 4:19. Wherefore let him that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing, as unto a faithful Creator. Commit the keeping of your souls. You remember what Jesus said when he was on the cross? What was one of the last words he said? Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. What was he saying? He was trusting in God. And that's what we should do. Psalm 31:24 says, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. All ye that hope in the Lord. Keep trusting in God. And look to the reward. In Hebrews, Moses was ridiculed by his own brethren. But how was he able to do that? Now sometimes people get tired of doing the right thing because of what happens inside the brethren. Now sometimes we think persecution is only outside. It ought to be only outside, but sometimes it comes from within. But when it does, we can look at Moses here and see what it says. He chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Why was it he was willing to put up with those murmuring, complaining, ungrateful, stiff-necked people again and again and again, over and over and over, who pushed him until they finally got him to strike that rock and not honor God when God told him to speak to the rock? But yet, he bore with those people. You ever find people who say, I just get tired of being around brethren because of the way they're treating me. Now, if you're in the kingdom of Christ long enough, there's going to be times where we rub one another the wrong way, where maybe we said something or did something. Those things are going to happen. Okay, it won't be the first that it happens to us. But when it does, first off, let's don't do that. But when it does, look at what Moses did. He suffered affliction with the people of God. And how was he able to do that? Verse 26, He esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. I think it could have been tempting for anybody else other than Moses to have said, I'm tired of dealing with these people. I didn't want this job. I didn't sign up for this. This is how they're treating me. They're accusing me of being a judge. I didn't even want this job. And look how they're treating me. I just want to go back to Egypt. Look at back what I had back there. Look at all the pleasures and the treasures and the money and the royalty. And I was in a royal house. I don't deserve this kind of treatment. He could have done all of that. Yet, what's he doing? It says here, he looked to the recompense of reward. What's the reward? It was being in heaven with the Lord. Galatians 6 says, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. In 1 Corinthians 15:58, he says, be ye steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. It's not for nothing. If it's for the Lord and it's the right thing. You've got something to look forward to. And then finally, don't treat others that way. If you're being persecuted, how should you respond to persecution? Not by doing the same thing in return. It's tempting, isn't it? When somebody does that to you, says something about you, hurts you in some way, mistreats you in some way, it's so tempting to give them back what they've given to you. Give them a taste of their own medicine. Get revenge. That's the human, fleshly side that we have to deny. That is not the Lord's way. That's not how He tells us to act. Psalm 15. The kind of man who's going to have fellowship with the Lord, who's going to dwell in His tabernacle. Who is he? Verse 3. He that backbiteth not with his tongue. Somebody hurls an insult at you. Don't hurl an insult back. That's childish. Remember when you were kids? I know you are, but what am I? That sounds so childish. It's immature. Don't backbite with your tongue. Nor doeth evil to his neighbor. You don't have to repay evil for evil. Nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. Don't feel like, okay, well, I got to find something to do back to them to show them how it feels. No. The kind of person who's going to dwell with the Lord is the one who doesn't do those things. But don't reproach your brethren. You've got to remember we're on the same team. And if we're going to be able to last when persecution does come, the greatest strength that's going to be able to give to us, besides us trusting in the Lord, is us being able to count on each other, trust each other, lean on each other, lay down your lives for each other. That's what He's calling on us to do. We need that strength among ourselves. Let's don't ever let the devil come in and cause strife among us or cause us to be divided or torn apart. Okay? The last thing we need to do is be fighting with each other. Our war is not with each other. Our war is against sin. And so, that's what we need to be reminded of. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and curse not. I hope this has been encouraging. I hope this has been beneficial to know how we can share in the reproach of Christ and how to respond. Appreciate your attention. If you're not a Christian, we want you to know that Jesus doesn't hide the fact that if you become a Christian, that there will be a challenge. He said, unless you take up your cross, deny yourself, follow Him, can't be His disciple. Are you willing to deny yourself? Are you willing to believe that Jesus is the Christ? And if that means in that belief you're going to be made fun of, Are you going to be pressured or mistreated in some way? That the Lord was mistreated for you so you can be saved, so you're not ashamed of Him. You could come to the front, confess that belief, be willing to change and repent, be baptized for the remission of your sins, and then live faithfully. If you're a Christian and you're struggling in some way, maybe you're in need of prayers, or if you've done something wrong that you need to confess and repent of, we're not here to condemn. We want to restore you and become back into the proper fellowship of the Lord. Whatever your need is, come now while we stand and as we sing.